Morning, everybody. This is Celeste Duckworth with Vertikal Live Radio. Today, we have our featured guest is Okorie Johnson of Atlanta. He's a cellist and a composer, and I'm so excited about interviewing him today on Vertikal Live Radio. But first, let's thank some of our sponsors today. We want to thank Socks Plus. They are the best darn place for socks in the country. And you'll find the largest selection of socks and patterns anywhere in the world. And some of the best of K-Bell, Ozone, and Biella are featured on their internet site. So explore the site at socks, S-O-X, plus, Plus.com. And if you do purchase anything, if you add VK10 in the checkout, you'll be able to get a 10% discount, and that's for all Vertikal fans that are listening. So remember, VK10 at checkout. Our other sponsor we like to thank is Champion Travel Escapes. Champion Travel Escapes has been a great sponsor to Vertikal Magazine, and if you'd like to see some of the hottest deals in travel this year, you want to go to their website at championtravelescapes.com. Also, you can one of the great things I like about them is that you can actually plan your travel. So if you're planning to travel somewhere at the end of the year or any time of the year, if you want a little 3-day travel, a little escape, they actually accept payments. So you can actually schedule that into your budget, which I think is an awesome idea. So make sure you go to their website, championtravelescapes.com. So today, as I said, we're welcoming Okorie Johnson. He's an Atlanta, Georgia-based cellist and composer. And he's performed and recorded with various artists like India.Arie, Della Soul, Anthony David, Callaghan, Paul Mercer, just to name a few. And today we're going to talk to him about his life as a cellist. We're going to talk about some of the things that inspire him, and we're also going to talk about what is his community give back. So I'd like you to welcome Okorie Johnson today. And Okorie, I'm happy to have you on our program today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you hear us?
I'm glad to be here. I can hear. Can you hear me?
Right. Yes, I can hear you fine. Sometimes it's a little.
Good.
In fact, it's so good today. I'm like, ooh, okay.
All right, good. I'm glad.
Side, okay. Right.
Thank you so much for having me this morning. I appreciate being here.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to tell you, I just happen to be, kind of going through my social media, and one of my friends on Facebook had posted, you were her friend, and I saw something, and I was like, oh, let me listen to this, and I really loved it. So I had to get an opportunity of having you on. So I'll say that you're one of my other favorite cellists. So,
okay.
And every cellist has a little bit of a different style, and I really enjoyed your style.
Thank you.
So I thought it was a great opportunity to introduce you to our audience, Vertikal, and just to kind of get a little bit about your life as a cellist and, and what you've been doing. So the cello is a very interesting instrument, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's more versatile than you think it is. So everyone, we're going to, we have some questions for Okorie. And if you're in the chat room today, if you have a question you want to shout out to me, just let me know and I will ask Okorie the question. So Okorie, growing up cello, when did you start playing?
I started just before my 7th birthday. Probably the school year. My birthday's in December, and I started in September of that year with an institution called the DC Youth Orchestra in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And I really wish I had a great origin story with the cello. It's not all that exciting. The truth of the matter is that it was the only class in the orchestra that had available spaces or that I could play. Okay. The violin classes were all full. I was 6, so I should have had my 2 front teeth, but I didn't at the time. So that ruled out all woodwind and brass instruments. And I was also kind of small, so the bass didn't work. And my mother's sanity would not allow for percussion. So the only other 2 instruments were viola and cello. And my mother played viola when she was younger, so she encouraged me to try something different. And I did, and I just kind of enjoyed it and took to it. So that was, probably September, October of 1980, maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if there were any openings besides cello, would you have picked anything else?
I don't think I would have. I don't know. I don't remember having any preference for another instrument. I know that I wanted to play an instrument, and I just enjoyed, making noise on anything. If I saw a piano, I liked to bang on it, or someone had a guitar, I was always interested in that. But I know I didn't really have a preference, which is the reason why I think it was pretty easy to get me to do the cello. I didn't feel like I was giving something else up. And I don't know that I also loved the sound of the cello until much later, I think. I thought it was fun, and I started doing well at it, but the beginning was just kind of the same way that people take piano or they take violin. They do it kind of because you think you might have to, or, someone's expecting you to. And I think the relationship I have with the instrument now developed much later in my life.
So tell us a little bit. I've listened to some interviews that you've done, and tell our audience a little bit about the deal you made with your mom and playing the cello.
Yeah, so to this point, so the cello was one of the things that I did. And, the thing about any instrument is that it requires practice. And maybe about a year into playing the cello, I started to get, good enough that my private teacher required that we buy an actual cello. The cello I started playing on was a rental from the orchestra, and it wasn't very good, but it was fine enough to get me started. But my private teacher said I had to buy a decent quality student instrument. And in 1980, or no, that would have been 81 or so, that instrument cost my mom probably $650, around $600. Which, to be honest with you, $600 for an instrument today in 2017 would be, a pretty significant investment. But it was a big investment for my mom, single mom at the time. And so the deal that she made with me was that I had to play until I graduated from the college. And I think there probably is something a little exploitive in that deal, because I was 7 and I had to commit to that. I'm not sure I knew what I was committing to, but I did. I played all the way through high school. And sadly, at the time, I thought I was going to kind of put it down, or at least not play it as seriously as I had been playing it. But I definitely made a contract. I didn't quite sign a contract, literally, but I made a verbal agreement with my mother shortly after 7, probably turning 8, that I would play this instrument for the next 10 years, and there was no quitting. Yeah, there was no quitting at all. It turned out to be a good decision.
That's interesting.
Turned out to be a good investment,
I think I think any mother and child who's playing instrument can relate to the contract. My daughter came home with a baritone, and we're a musical family. We're like, okay, you're gonna have to practice that outside, because we didn't know how good she was.
Right.
I think that's so.
Yeah, that's the challenge of beginning an instrument, right? I think even when you show promise, you're still developing a pleasing sound, I think. And that's one of the obstacles I think that young players have to get over, that the ones that stick with it are willing to play, even though the sound isn't always as pleasing as they would like in the beginning. But yeah, it took some cajoling and certainly some very stern insisting from my mom. As a little kid, I enjoyed music, but I played a lot of other things. I at the time was playing ice hockey. In addition to playing ice hockey, I was, active. I lived across the street from a playground, so I enjoyed going outside and playing basketball with the fellas. And, there's just stuff to do, and not all of it was all that. A lot of it was more exciting sometimes than practicing the cello. But my mom kept me focused, and I was always one of those kids where 10 minutes in, I'd forget that I was practicing. I would just have a good time.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Who's been who besides having internal encouragement to keep pushing yourself, were there any other encouragers in your life, like instructors or any other family members who really encouraged you?
You know, I think I have been blessed, or really over-blessed in some instances, with people who have supported me with music. Everyone in my family was always very excited about my playing, and you know, from a relatively early age, I got a chance to do recitals and play at school, and then I went to the school where they had a pretty decent string ensemble. So, you know, my grandmother was very supportive. Of course, my private teachers, the 2 or 3 most significant would have been Kenneth Whitley, Robert Hoffmeckler, and Oliver Edel, were all very supportive. But somebody who created the most perhaps unexpected opportunities for me was a gentleman. I went to a school named Landon School for Boys, and his name was Richard Weileman. And he was my music teacher and string ensemble director from 4th grade until I graduated from high school. He's probably the only person, probably even longer than my private teachers, who has been a part of my musical life for that long. Very much not only encouraged me, but created opportunities for me. He conducted a private pops orchestra made of professionals around Washington, D.C., and by the time I was 12 or 13 and played well enough to be able to, you know, make it through the music that they were playing, he would put me in the orchestra, and we would play Christmas concerts and Peter and the Wolf. And I remember it's a fun little exploration of pops. You know, so pops means that they played some classical music, but also popular music. But the most popular tune I think that they played that I recognized was a Fifth of Beethoven. Have you ever heard that disco track that was out in the 70s? Yeah, you have that. So I thought that was really I thought that was really cool.
I love that.
Oh, I'm playing da 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 da, and then you drop in the drum trap, and it was a lot of fun. But I think the most important opportunity that he gave me was as a senior in high school. He encouraged me to play a senior recital, and it was a pretty pivotal point in my relationship with the cello because I had just actually stopped private lessons with my teacher, and this is kind of a theme in my life. I was doing a lot of things. So I was playing sports, I was in the play, I was on the church council at my church, and I had a social life, and my teacher wanted me to practice 2.5 to 3 hours a day, and it just wasn't something I was willing to do. I'm not going to say it wasn't something that I could do. It would have taken a decent amount of sacrifice because even to practice the 45 minutes to an hour that I was practicing, sometimes I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning in order to do it. But he wanted me to cut out everything else. So between not practicing enough, between the tension of not wanting to cut out everything else, right at around 16 or 17, I stopped playing. I stopped working with him, and again was content just to let the cello do what it was going to do. And then it was my high school music director who said, "Guess what, Okorie? Your senior year, you're going to play a senior recital." And it was the second senior recital that my school had ever done, and it was going to be Haydn's Concerto in C, the piece that Rostropovich made very famous. And he wanted me to play all 3 movements. And so I had worked up the first movement and performed it out, and I was working on the second movement, and I hadn't looked at the third at all. And what was interesting about that was I said, yeah, I'd love to do it. And I committed to doing it in that space of time when I didn't have a teacher. And so what was really strange about it is that from the moment that I was asked to do it, I practiced at school, after school, anywhere between 2 to 3 hours a day for the next 4 or 5 months. Excuse me, I'm here in Atlanta, and it is storming. And
I hear that.
Really, yeah, got it. Anyway, so I ended up doing exactly what my private teacher wanted me to do, and I probably started practicing in October, and the concert was in March. And it came off, and the best thing about that concert was that he got his professional orchestra to be the backing orchestra. So I got a chance to play at my school, and the orchestra was there, and I got a chance to play a 20-minute concerto, most of it by memory. And, I don't know, it was a big deal, and it's probably the greatest investment in me that someone made without really having to, like without, there wasn't really kind of a contractual obligation
Right.
And I'm
right.
really appreciative to him for that. I wish I could say that as a result of that, I decided I was going to go and major in music and go off and play, but to me that was, sadly, that was going to be sort of my swan song, because I was going off to Morehouse, I was majoring in English. I didn't see myself majoring in music, and, that might have been the first moment where I had the agency to put the cello down, and sadly I kind of did, but fortunately the cello was a much more stubborn and persistent element in my life than I was. So that's a good thing.
I like what it's interesting because saying that you went into, English, because I know quite a few creative people. It's interesting how our creativity is there, and we choose other things to go into, but it's always there in the back of your mind. I mean, and even when you have I think every one of us has had a little turning point or something that I like to say something that really sealed it on your heart. So no matter what you do, it does end up kind of coming back. So that's interesting that you went into English. And so I'm going to ask you now about, I listened to a wonderful piece called The Beckoning of the Bride that you wrote. And can you give us some inspiration behind that? And I want to play a little bit after you tell us that inspiration behind that piece.
Yeah, well, the story I tell in the shows that I do is that it's a piece I wrote for my wife, and it's the piece that the bridal party walked down the aisle on at our wedding. And what's interesting about that piece, though, is that it was written sometime before our wedding, and it was written for my wife, and I wasn't exactly sure what to call it. But as we were running through the service at the wedding rehearsal, the priest said, "All right, and this is where we're going to have your song, Okorie. What is the name of that song?" And I told him I didn't really have a name. He said, "Oh, well, let me listen to it." So he listened to it and said, "Oh, it's such a beautiful piece. It sounds like you are beckoning your bride." And from that moment,
nice.
that's what it became known as, Beckoning of the Bride. And and it's a piece that, for me, in all honesty, my wife doesn't love it all that much when I play it. Not because it's super intimate, and she did, but she's somewhat of a private person, and it puts our relationship and my affection for her out there in front of people when I'm performing it, and so that's probably a lot more attention sometimes than she loves, but it's probably a foundational piece for me because I would say it's the oldest solo cello piece that I perform in my everyday set. So I wrote that piece maybe back in 1996, long before I knew anything about looping and long before I could actually play it by myself. So that piece originated actually with me playing kind of the percussive, not the percussive, the pizzicato part that you hear, and then I would teach other musicians the other parts. Specifically, primarily just on the day of our wedding, a good friend of mine named LaTanya Peoples ended up playing the melody on her violin. She's a great violinist, and we still play in a quartet together. But it wasn't until in the last 2 years with my discovery of looping technology that I was able to play it all by myself and to have an expression that is much more personal and specific to how I was feeling or how I feel for my wife. So that's Beckoning of the Bride.
Okay, well, we're going to listen to a little bit of Beckoning of the Bride. It can take a few little minutes to listen to this. And then we're going to be back with Okorie and talk some more about his work and a little bit more information for you music lovers out there. So let's take a little bit of listen to Beckoning of the Bride. That is such a beautiful piece. That was called Beckoning of the Bride. I have to tell you, I know it's a personal song, but I have to tell you that that's one of the songs I was listening to when I was writing a scene to one of my, to a book that I'm working on. And I mean, it just literally just made me stop and listen to the song. And so it's a very inspirational piece for me for a book that I'm writing. And it just, you know, and probably, you know, you as a creative person can understand that sometimes things hit you a certain way, and they kind of push your creativity a little bit further, you know, than where it's at. So it's a beautiful piece, and thank you for sharing it with us and letting us play that.
Thank you very much.
Tell me, is anyone in your family musical? Your children, are they musical, or do you encourage them? Or
well, I think everyone in my family has a deep, intimate relationship with music. At least my wife and my children do. My mom and my dad both have played instruments. You know, as I mentioned earlier, my mom played viola, and my dad, I think she also played flute in the marching band. My dad played trumpet. And from what I understand, my dad was fairly good. But as an instrument, felt like he needed to choose between something more practical and lucrative and the instrument. So he went in and majored in computer science quite some time, a long time ago. So he put it down, and I keep threatening to buy him a trumpet so he could pick it back up, but he's not interested. And you know, my mom and my dad my dad especially is a big fan of music. And my mom likes music, I would say, more than casually, but she's not necessarily a collector. Like, she didn't have albums and that kind of stuff around the house. But she loved musicals. So her favorite musical was My Fair Lady, and then she was a big fan of Sound of Music and kind of, you know, introduced me to that, and that also became a big thing for me. So there was usually a lot of singing or humming or something going on. If it wasn't Sound of Music or My Fair Lady, it was Lionel Richie. Those were the three things that my mom pretty much would have supported musically. But classical music she loves and appreciates, but isn't necessarily an active or an assertive appreciator. Like, so she doesn't necessarily bring that into her life, but she always loves when classical music comes on. I would say the relationship that I have with music now, I owe in large part to many of the musicians I met when I was in college at Morehouse. And I would say not only was I introduced to musicians who cared very much about their craft and very much about their instrument, but I was, for whatever reason, just lucky enough to be around a lot of musicians who thought that their music was a way for them not only to express themselves, but maybe even to change the world. So I would say I was around a lot of artists, around a lot of people who were trying to figure out how they could say something impactful with their art and with their music and with their instrument. And I identify with that quite a bit. I think one of the reasons why I became an English major was because I thought I had something to say, and stumbling into this collective of musicians who used music as a way of saying things that they thought were important. Stumbling into that group was foundational for my identity as an adult musician and artist. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the process. Okay, so your process. So you use, and I want you to kind of give us the layman's description. You use a lot of high quality amplification, looping technology, and sound processing to create your songs. And you also have a lot of genres that you like to include, and I could hear that in some of your songs. You like to use a little funk and reggae, and and all these are part of your what they say, part of this is all, what you put in your song, kind of like tell a story, putting them all together. So tell us a little bit of what looping technology is.
Looping technology is, let's talk specifically about what I use, which is a looping pedal. Is simply a box with some computer circuitry inside of it that allows it to record once you hit a button what you're playing, and then once you hit that button again, it loops it. So it basically plays what you just recorded indefinitely. And if you use the looping button well, if you're able to do it so that it's metrical and you do it at the one of every 4 measures, then you end up with a kind of musical phrase that people identify with or kind of recognize as music the way that they're used to engaging it. So I discovered the looping pedal probably in the early part of 2014, maybe the latter part of 2013. I experimented with it, but I hadn't quite melded with it. You know what I mean? There were some things I was doing. I was creating these little bits and pieces of things. And then I got the looping pedal that I use now probably in the summer of 2014 and started really, I started being able to think with it a little bit better. But I would say that I wouldn't have called myself a looping cellist until the morning of my 40th birthday on December 18th, 2014, when I sat down at my instrument and I was not all that excited with how things were going in my life, and that I used to be an English teacher, and I left the classroom to go produce film. And I'd gotten off to a pretty quick start with the film that I was producing, but it had started to plateau, and I didn't really understand how to be resilient enough to kind of get past that plateau. And so 40 was this pivotal moment for me where I had to decide whether I was going to continue down this path or do something different. And I wasn't excited about that, the choice, because I didn't know what to do. And I sat down on my instrument, and all of a sudden this bass line came out of me, and my looper was already set up. And I captured that bass line, and I just listened to it for a long time, and I started to kind of tear up a little bit because I felt like it was a really succinct expression of how I was feeling at the time. And then I started to improvise over top of it. And it was the improvisation that really, opened up the floodgates. And by the end of the 10 or 15 minutes that I was improvising over it, I was like bawling, face was wet, maybe even the top of my shirt was wet, that kind of thing. It's pretty funny. But I felt like the relationship between the looped bass line and the improvisation were the beginning of a process that was powerful for me, not just musically, but also with regard to helping me to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I spent the next 2 weeks kind of really experimenting with that, and I came up with the title track off of my album, not the title track, the first track off of my album, 40. And it communicated to me that, one, I can use this technology to communicate things. 2, that there's a process here that I'm beginning to understand and really getting comfortable with. And 3, that I want to make a bunch more songs just like this. So that was probably December 18th, 2014, when I started incorporating looping pretty much into my most personal artistic expression. And what it allows me to do, and what allows the cello to do, is to use this broad range of musicality and to create a very, I think, well-spaced picture sonically, right? So you've got the lows on the cello, which allow you to do percussive things or bass things. You know what I mean? Like I can kind of play my C and G string like a bass player and slap it. But you've got those 2 middle strings that can be very much like guitar or keys and provide chords and kind of color and texture. But then on my A string, playing really up to the harmonic and beyond, I can provide a melodic line that kind of sits on top of all of that. And it all of a sudden is a piece of music that seems constructed very much like the music that you would hear if you turned on the radio. And the looper allowed me to be able to think like that real time. So I can, think, I like this idea, capture it, put something over top of it, and then play a melody. And that's my process. It's rare that I actually go to the looper with an idea saying, I want to write this song. Very frequently, I'm at the looper, I'm improvising, I'm playing around, and I find something that I like, I capture that, and I just start building up.
What do you enjoy most about creating music?
Well, I don't know if you can tell. I tend to talk a lot, right? I love language. I really, I think the other reason why I majored in English was just because I think I also am comfortable with language and comfortable with words.
Okay.
And I find that there's a lot in my life that I'm able to express with words. But there's a small emotional, either vulnerable part or let's stick with vulnerable part that I typically either don't attempt to communicate with words, or for whatever reason, words don't even really allow me to see or understand that part. I think one of the reasons why I started kind of getting emotional when I was writing 40 was that it was tapping into part of my person that is not necessarily so easily tapped into with words. And I think that's what I like most about music, its ability to transcend the word, to provide expression for parts of our person that resist, simple or easy explanation. And then the real magic for me is, if I were just doing that and I enjoyed it and nobody else enjoyed it, then we wouldn't be here talking about it. I think the other thing is that sometimes there are things that are hard to say, but that a piece of art can capture in a way that moves you and does so very eloquently or articulately. And it hasn't used one word. It hasn't used one kind of language or linguistic idiom that is limited in some ways. So that's what I love most about music, being able to communicate in a way that transcends the limitations of language.
Perfectly said. I love that explanation. I really do. That is an explanation that can really transcend over all types of creativity, and I love that explanation. How often or how long do you practice? I mean, is it compared to when you were younger? So what is your you're saying when you practice?
The funny thing is that I practice a lot more now than when I was a kid. A lot more. Right now, I think the challenges are not so much how much do I practice, but it's how much can I practice. And there are also different kinds of practice, So there's I don't really have a gig coming up. I'm not preparing for something. Let me sit down and spend my time improving my skills and also just exploring what it is I might like to communicate. I don't get that practice as much as I would like, to be honest with you. I would like to do 3-4 hours of that a day. Very frequently I find myself balancing some of that with I have gigs coming up. So the gigs coming up to some degree direct, what I can practice or what I'm practicing for. And so I play with a lot of people, and then I have solo shows as well. So very frequently each week has a decent amount of music that either needs to be refreshed and prepped or learned or maybe even created. So there's that practice. And then there's also, I don't spend a lot of time so much anymore going through classical or repertoire or learning other pieces. I mean, covers aren't a huge part of my solo set, but every once in a while I'm asked to learn a piece or to, I gravitate towards a classical piece because it either does something for me emotionally or technically. And I get a chance to do that as well. But I can practice on any day from 5 to 6 hours to sometimes just an hour. It really depends upon, what is being asked of me professionally and musically, but then also, what's being asked of me as a father and as a husband. Because,
I understand
that. There are still demands, other demands too. So,
Correct. So do you ever get nervous before a performance?
I think there's not to say that that's not a good question. I would say the more accurate question is, do I ever not get nervous before a performance? I would say 60 to 70% of the performances I play, I do get a little nervous about, and not because I'm not prepared as much as it's just very difficult to practice performing. The only way to practice performing is by performing. And there are things that happen to you as a performer that sometimes happen to you and sometimes don't happen to you. Sometimes, especially because I play amplified, sometimes I'll play in an environment where I don't exactly feel comfortable with the sound that's coming back, but it's the best that it's going to be, so I've got to live with it. In those moments, sometimes I do get nervous because performance just isn't the place to think. Performance is the place where the work you've done just needs to come out. And if there's something that, is kind of a screen or some gauze between, what's inside and what needs to come out, then sometimes that does get me a little nervous. Other times I'll play and I'll have a sound check and it sounds like heaven. And I'm just like, oh, my God, I could stay here and play all day. And in those moments, I think I tend to lose myself and I don't get quite as nervous. But the thing about being a professional musician and playing in a variety of different spaces that I find myself playing in, so I'm not a classical musician in the sense that most of the time I play acoustically and most of the time I play in ensembles with other acoustic instruments, so I'm 70 to 80% of the time I'm amplified. Very frequently I'm in ensemble with other amplified instruments. Many of them are designed to be more effective in that amplified space in the cello. So sometimes they're louder or sometimes they just express a broader range of sounds. And all of those things provide obstacles sometimes for being able to play comfortably. And so in those moments, those can be nerve-wracking because you're worried more so about hearing yourself and controlling your technique than you are about being free and being artistic. So I definitely still get a little nervous. I get more nervous sometimes when I'm playing with people that I haven't played with for a long time, and then a little less nervous when I've played with people that I've played with for a long time. And then depending upon the environment, I'm the least nervous when I'm playing by myself, simply because I know those pieces pretty well, and as long as I can hear myself and as long as I'm comfortable in that space, I'm going to hopefully find a moment to kind of lose myself. What about you? You play, right?
No.
No, okay. Gotcha.
I play the guitar. I do play the guitar, and I do play the piano a little bit. So I understand that. But that's not my, I love music and I love to play, but I actually, my gift has always been in painting and in writing. So I think like you really greatly when you expressed about those parts of you that are hard to explain, writing does that for me. So you can get the whole picture from me when I write rather than if you see my painting or hear me playing something or singing. Got it. Your newest album, if I have that correct, is Liminal.
Liminal, yeah.
Is that how you say it? Liminal. Yeah. Okay.
Liminal.
Liminal. Okay.
So
Give me a little bit of information about that.
Yeah. So liminal is like the suffix of subliminal. And the word specifically means in between spaces or at the border of things. So your subliminal is at the intersection of your conscious and your subconscious, right? So and so that's kind of subliminal communication. But what I like about liminal is that I feel that a lot of my life has been lived at the intersection of various borders. I grew up in inner city Washington, D.C. I was born 10 or 15 years before the advent of crack in urban spaces in Washington, D.C. And that's a very specific experience that I have, I think, authentic experience in. But I also went to a prep school outside of the city, and so that was a very different community and a very different experience. I played ice hockey. That sounds strange whenever I tell people that, but I'm just part of a black middle-class family from the city where 4 or 5 of us grew up playing ice hockey. And we weren't well off, and we don't have many generations of our family that were doing it, but just one generation of our family did it. We don't have anybody who does it now. But so that was a different experience, and that was a different community. And then my music world was also a very different experience in a different community, and not very many people existed in all these different worlds, but I felt like I was kind of constantly traveling back and forth between them, or just kind of sitting right there in the middle. And so liminal was a word that I learned when I was in grad school. I got a master's degree in American Studies from Maryland University back in 2008. And it was probably my favorite word at the time, specifically because of the way that people talked about liminal identities, or living in between the borders of several different identities. And I think not only is that a good, accurate description of my life, but it's a description of my music. I play a classical instrument, or at least an instrument with, hundreds of years old kind of classical history. I use technology, which is really very new. I mean, probably not even older than 15 or 20 years, at least, being used amongst most people. And I play across genre, so I play everything from kind of jazzy things to classical things to, I have some things that might even be considered funk or reggae. And so I feel like that project specifically, is a description of where I find myself as an artist at the intersection of many different seemingly discrete borders and communities. And but it's a comfortable space for me to live in. And in the same way that I love the word, I love the merging of experiences and cultures and identities and expressions that, cross-genre art creates. And I think liminal is kind of a part of that phenomenon.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a commercial break, and we're going to play liminal as our going out on our break here, and then we're going to come back and talk to Okorie Johnson some more. So this is a great time if you need to get up and refresh your coffee to do that, and at the same